Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. So this video will describe the process of fitting a USB floppy disk emulator into an Akai S700 sampler. Now the Akai S700 sampler has a QuickDisk drive, so the process is a little more different than usual, but let's get into it. Down here we have a Gotek floppy disk emulator. Now we need to change the firmware that's on it for a different one that will support QuickDisks. So we start by removing these screws. Now the reason we do this is so that we can fit a programming header, which is this thing here. Let me get it a little bit closer. This programming header, which we will need to solder onto the Gotek. Now, online you can buy Goteks which have already got the operating system, the new firmware put onto it, but it's cheaper to do it yourself and maybe more satisfying. So there's the Gotek. So we want to solder the new programming header here on the second row of pins, okay? Now this is a fairly easy soldering job, and I'm sure anyone who's done any kind of soldering before won't find this very challenging, but it does need to still be done. Now that's done, we can put everything back. There we go. And you can see the extra pins that I've just added, which are just here. Okay. The next thing is to go on to the internet and get the new firmware for the floppy disk emulator. So let's bring this around. That's probably a better way of doing this, but it will just be very quick. So I will put the link in the description for this. But basically you load your web browser and you Google for HxC. Okay, now here it is, HxC floppy emulator, HxC 2001 headquarters. So you need to go there. Then you need to click on this bar, HxC firmware for Gotek. And then you need to click to purchase this firmware, and then there's a link to the web store. Now that is €10 plus €2 tax, and I won't show that process. But what will happen is you will get an email from the author of the HxC firmware confirming that you've bought a copy of the firmware. And then the next step is to flash it onto the Gotek itself. So when you go to the HxC website, there is a download for something called the STM32 serial bridge. So you need to download that. And then you need to connect the Gotek drive to your computer in a very specific way. So first of all, you need a USB serial interface, which looks like this. It has one USB port and 4 smaller wires, red, black, white and green. And we connect that to the Gotek in a certain way, which I will now explain. So the red and the black go on the white power connector at the bottom. Put the black in one of the middle pins and the red in one of the pins closest to the floppy connector. Then on the connector you solder, you first put a jumper on the first 2 pins, and then you put the white connector, and then you put the green, and then finally you put a jumper on the last 2 pins. Let me show you the final configuration of that. Can you see that there? Yes, red and black on the bottom, white and green and a jumper on the top, and then a final jumper here. Now I find the easiest way to start is by running this without your serial port device connected. This program unfortunately has to be run on a Windows laptop or other computer. So you run the STM32 serial bridge, and you get this dialog box that comes up. So down here we want to deal with the serial port connection. So the first thing we do is to hit refresh, and then in this drop down menu we can see there's a number of serial ports, and that will depend on your system. So we've got COM 6, 7 and 8. At this point I will connect the USB port which is connected to the Gotek. Now I hit refresh again, and you can see that there is a new device which has appeared. So that is referring to this device here. So I select that and then choose open, and then I go up and connect to HxC. It says link is up, and then it changes to device detected, and it tells you how many you're allowed to program. Now I've got 1 unit left because I paid for 1 license, and that refers to this. Then you click program and it will say starting here. And at this point it's programming. And now it has been programmed. It says done here, and that I have 0 units left. So I can close the serial bridge and disconnect the USB port, and then disconnect these connectors. Now this Gotek drive has been programmed with the HxC bootloader, so we can put a real firmware on it, and for that process we can use any type of computer. So I'll show you now how to download the HxC firmware. So what we've installed so far is the bootloader, so you need to get the actual firmware. So I'll search for HxC, there we go. Then you go to HxC firmware for Gotek, and you download the latest firmware, which is a zip file here. Then we can open that. Now here we can see there is a QuickDisk folder. So we go in there, and the file we need is this one, that's the firmware. And we'll also copy the Akai formatted QuickDisk. And finally, the configuration file. Now I'll show you how to prepare the USB stick. So I like to use the SanDisk Cruiser Fit flash drives because they're very small and they don't stick out from the Gotek floppy emulator. So I'm going to insert one that I've freshly opened. There, it's been recognized by Mac OS. So if we open that, you'll see that it comes with some applications for Windows that we don't want. And you'll also see it's been formatted in FAT32, which is what we want for the Gotek HxC firmware. So what I like to do is, because I use Mac, I like to prepare this in a certain way. So I go into Terminal, I go into /volumes no name, because that I haven't named the USB stick yet, and I do rm-rf star, which will delete everything. Now, Apple creates these annoying hidden files, but there is a way that you can stop it doing that. So you can create, to stop it creating a trash directory, you can create your own file called trashes. And you can also create a file called F7TSD, and that will stop the Apple OS X from creating that directory as well. So now if we do ls-la, which will list all the hidden files as well, you'll see that rather than having directories for trash and F7TSD, I have got files there which will block it from doing that. Final step is to rename the volume, and I will call it Akai S700. There we go. Then you copy the files onto it that I indicated. Just to show you the layout of the files, I've renamed the QuickDisk image just with this plain name, DSKA0001, and I've duplicated it 6 times. You can duplicate it as many times as you want, but the S700 can store 6 samples at once, so I figured that that would be a good starting point. So that's what your USB key should look like. So the plan now is to test fit the floppy disk emulator into the sampler. So let's get going with that. Let's start by taking off the case. Now I don't want to remove the QuickDisk drive just yet. I would like just to make sure that what I've done works. I'm just going to lay the Gotek on top here, but I do need to be able to disconnect the existing QuickDisk drive, and to do that I will need to move the power supply a bit, but I don't think I'll have to unplug it, so I'm just going to unscrew these 3 screws holding the power supply. That'll allow me just to shift the power supply a little bit out of the way so I can unplug the QuickDisk. There we go. And I will screw it back just with one screw, just to make sure it doesn't move. Now this black cable, as I said, that is your QuickDisk connector. Now what I have bought from eBay is this. Let's move it a bit closer to the camera so you can see. This is an adapter which will go between the QuickDisk interface and on the other side Gotek, and this cable here is for the power. So I've just checked the orientation of the cable. The yellow wire is normally on the left hand side when it connects to the built-in QuickDisk, but we need to flip that so that it is on the right hand side of this adapter. Here it is. So I'm just going to plug in the interface like that, and then the power wire, the black is the ground. I just tested that using my multimeter. So that goes in the middle pins, and the white, which is 5 volts, goes to the pin which is nearest to the connector. Right. Now let's switch it on and see what happens. Okay, good, it's working. So it says loader, which means the bootloader. So what you have to do is to insert the USB key. That's detecting it. And it has loaded the firmware, but there is some kind of error. So the problem was a schoolboy error. It was simply that I hadn't numbered the disk images from 0. I'd started numbering them from 1. So I quickly renamed the images so they started from 0, and now it's all working. HxC firmware, disk image 0, and we can use these up and down to go between the 6 images that I have on there. So that's worked brilliantly. But the next issue is, how can we fit this nicely in the existing drive bay? And that will be something I tackle in the next few days. Okay, so it's time to get this Akai S700 back together, but with the Gotek drive rather than the original QuickDisk drive. To get the Akai S700 to this stage, you lift off the case, which is a screw here, here, at the back, here and here, and you lift the top of the case off. Then there's 3 screws on the top and 3 screws on the bottom, and you pull these knobs off. Then you can remove the front panel. 2 screws to remove this switch. 3 screws to remove the power supply. and then you're in the position to be able to remove the existing QuickDisk drive, which is 4 screws on the bottom, which you can easily see. At that point I removed the QuickDisk drive, then I refitted the power supply. So I switched to a webcam so I can show you a few aspects handheld. So this piece of wood is 120 millimeters wide and 90 millimeters deep, and it is 20 millimeters high. The thickness of the wood is 20 millimeters. Other than that, all I've had to do is cut this notch here to clear a screw hole inside the sampler. Now on the Gotek drive itself, it doesn't quite fit into the slot in the front. You need to grind off a little bit of the edge. So on the side nearest to the LED display, I would suggest filing off about 1 millimeter. Then on the other side, which is near to the Gotek logo, I think you would need to remove about 0.5 millimeter. The reason that it's different on each side is it's not quite central in the hole in the front panel. You can see I probably could have done this a bit more neatly. I used a Dremel, but I think I should just have used a file. So on the sampler itself, there's also some aspects to be aware of. Now, this screw here, I've had to grind about 2 millimeters off it so that it clears the Gotek drive, okay? And this screw here, I've also had to grind, and this is the screw for the foot. It was too high and it was preventing the wood from sitting flat. Now there is the wood, and you can see just about, yeah, there, very nicely, the screw hole that I have needed to cut a small notch out of the wood for in order to clear. On the bottom, we are able to fit 4 screws into the wood, which I will show you now. So this hole, this hole, this hole here, and this hole here. So that one, that one, that one, and that one, you're able to screw into the wood with those. And now I am ready to put everything back into the sampler. So the first thing will be the piece of wood, which is obviously extremely high tech. Here is the wood. Now I want to stick the drive on top of it with some double-sided tape. So I'm going to stick double-sided tape in this area now. And here we are. So I'm going to screw this bit of wood inside the sampler now. There we go. Right, the wood is attached, so I'm going to prepare the double-sided tape. And now I will insert the drive. I'm being careful not to touch the tape yet. Now I'll test fit the front panel. Kind of snaps on. Like that. It's not quite straight. There, now it is. Luckily there it wasn't, I hadn't completely pushed it down, so I could adjust that, but though I say so myself, that does look pretty good from the front. I'll show you guys all in a minute. Now to plug in the QuickDisk drive, exactly the same as with the test mode. Now to screw on the front panel. These 4 screws are from the old QuickDisk, which we don't need anymore because they've been replaced by wood screws. So I'll save those just in case. Now to fit the 3 knobs. The red one is the record knob. And now the top of the case. So that is fitted now. Let's have a look. And there we are, there's the front with the QuickDisk. All fitted, all good, strong, nice and flush. So I hope that was useful for any Akai S700 owners, or in fact any owners of machines with QuickDisks in. I'm sure you can reuse a lot of that. Hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel if you found that useful, and don't forget to like the video as well, that would be really great. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next video.